Today we are going to be talking about raising your expectations, because so many times we go through life with low expectations of what God can do in and through our lives. And if you're just joining us, we're making our way through the book of Joshua. We come to Joshua chapter 14 today, and we meet a gentleman by the name of Caleb. And Caleb has very high expectations. So follow along with me. I'm going to start reading in chapter 14, verse 6. So grab your iPhone or follow along on the screen or grab your Bible. Caleb said to Joshua, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought back to him a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly." Don't you love that line? "So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed your God wholeheartedly." Verse 10, "Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said to Moses while Israel moved through the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out." That was 40 years earlier. "I'm just as vigorous to go out into battle as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord has promised me that day. You yourselves heard that the Anakites, the giants, were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." Then Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. All right, do you see why I say Caleb had high expectations? He's an exceptional human being, isn't he? Can't you tell that? So here's where we are in the story. So the people of Israel have conquered the lowlands. They have defeated 31 kings and city-states. Joshua chapter 13 is about Joshua dividing the land among the tribes of Israel. Now we get to chapter 14, and Caleb comes along, this ferocious man of God, and he says, "Hey, give me the mountain. Give me the mountain with giants on it." And what I love about Caleb is Caleb has high expectations. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I have a key idea on the screen. This is where we're heading this morning. The hard things that God calls us to do, they grow us. So don't just ask God for comfort. Don't ask for the convenient. Don't ask for manageable. Ask God for a challenge, a mountain to climb and giants to conquer. Ask for a challenge that is bigger than you, that stretches you, makes you uncomfortable, something that makes a difference in this world and puts you at your best. You know, isn't it true? All of us face mountains with giants. We all have problems. We all have challenges that feel too big for us. Today, I want to invite you to raise your expectations of what God is going to do through you. And the question for you is, when you face a challenge, how will you respond? Today, I want to look at the life of Caleb, because Caleb is this extraordinary man, this extraordinary person of God. But what sets him apart? I want to look at those qualities today. The first quality I want to look at is this, is that Caleb had high expectations. And so my first challenge to you this morning is to raise your expectations. Go back to verse 12 with me. And here's how verse 12 starts. "Now give me the hill country that the Lord has promised me." So give me he's looking up. His expectations are up here. Caleb has always, it sounds like, been full of divine expectations and high expectations, because 40 years earlier, he's only 2 of 12 who say to Moses, "We can take the land." And so today, I want to challenge you to raise your expectations. I want to invite you to raise your expectations for your family. Maybe you have wanted to give up on a son or a daughter. Or maybe you've thought your husband or your wife will never come to Jesus Christ. I want to say, change your expectations. Raise them. Raise your expectations for your work and your career. Maybe you feel like you're just putting in time at your job. I want to say, no. your work is divine. Start seeing your job as your place to thrive in the name of Jesus Christ and show people in this world Jesus Christ. So raise your expectations at work. Raise your expectations for your ministry. Maybe you've been coming here to the Grove for months or years, and let's be honest, you've been skating in and out, and we haven't been getting the best of you. You know, you're leaving during the last song. Let's just be honest here. I want to say, raise your expectations for how God will use your passions and your abilities here at the church, in your church. So here's the problem. Here's what we're all going to fight against. We will all fight against low expectations, won't we? The temptation is to set our expectations low, and some say set your expectations low, then you can't ever be that disappointed, can you? But I want to say, raise your expectations. Resist low expectations. When I say that, I think about a golfer by the name of Gary Player. I had this unique privilege a couple of years ago of being invited to be the keynote speaker at an event where Gary Player was the other keynote speaker. And so on the first night there, we had dinner, and they put me across the table from Gary Player. Gary Player, if you don't know who he is, he's maybe one of the greatest golfers who's ever played the game. He's won 9 majors. He's won 159 PGA professional events. He's just an incredible golfer. And I sit across the table from, at the time, I'm not making this up, he's 85 years old. And it's just a couple of years ago. So I'm asking Gary, just getting to know him, I'm asking about life in Johannesburg. He's South African. And I assumed he came from an affluent family because he was a golfer. And so I said, you know, what was life like growing up in Johannesburg? You know, you played a lot of golf. He says, not at all. He said, my father worked in the mines. We didn't have much money at all growing up. He said, my father spent his entire career down in the dark mines under Johannesburg. And then he started to tell us about the rats in the mines. He said, my father talked about feeding the rats. All the miners feed the rats at their lunch break. I said, why would they feed the rats? He said, because when bad things happen in the mines, for example, if there's an earthquake and the shafts start to collapse, or maybe they hit an underground river and there's a flood coming in, the rats always know first, and they start to run for the exits. And so the miners know if the rats are running, you run with them. And so they fed the rats. And so he's telling us all about his life growing up. He said when he graduated from high school, he said that his father said, okay, Gary, it's time for you to come work in the mines with me. You got to start making a living. And he said, Dad, you don't get it. I don't plan to ever work in the mines. He said, I'm going to be a professional golfer. And he said, his dad said, Gary, you're crazy. There's no way on earth you could ever be a professional golfer. And Gary said, I'm not going down in the mines with the rats. He says, I'm going to be a professional golfer. My eyes are up here. And isn't it true? His father was a good man, he said, but his expectations were very low. And maybe there's been people in your life pushing your expectations low. They don't get what God can do in your life. I want to say, raise your expectations and resist the low expectation. Maybe you've been settling for average. Stop settling for average. Maybe you've been settling for good enough. Stop settling for good enough. You are meant for more than going down in the dark mines with a rat, aren't you? God has higher, bigger plans for you. So resist the low expectations and set higher expectations. I think we keep our expectations low because maybe sometimes we feel underprepared. We feel undereducated. We feel underqualified. Maybe you think you're too young, or you're too broke, or you're too old. And all you have to do is look at Caleb's life here and realize that all you need to do with God on your side is set your expectations higher and start to believe that God can do more in your life than he already is. And so I want to challenge you with this line. Abandon your small ambitions. I get that line from J.B. Phillips. J.B. Phillips was a famous theologian. He even translated the entire Bible, the J.B. Phillips translation, and he famously said to Christians, your God is too small. So abandon your small ambitions. Maybe you've had low expectations, thinking God can't do a whole lot. I want to say change your thinking on that. Because when your God is small, then your prayers are small, your ambitions are small, your aspirations are small, and your God becomes small. So start praying bigger prayers. Start raising your expectations. And like I said, there's always going to be people around you that push you down and push and cause you to have low expectations. Maybe those aren't the right people to listen to right now in your life. There was a moment when I felt that in mine and Veronica's relationship. What happened is we were young and in love, and so I asked her to marry me, and for some reason she said yes, and so we got engaged, and I was only a junior in college. She was a sophomore in college, and my older sister thought we were not ready for marriage, so she said, you guys need marriage counseling. I said, I don't need marriage counseling. She said, yes, you need marriage counseling. So she paid for 6 sessions for this very famous, well-known counselor in Orange County. And so we show up at his office. He had just written a book. Everybody knew this guy's name. We show up at his office, but we don't get the famous counselor. We get the starting intern, all right? The guy that I think had just been there a week or two. Anyway, we get that guy. And so we sit down with him, and he gives us a compatibility test. Anybody taken one of these? It was like 100 questions. And so we spent the whole first session filling out, doing this test. The next week we come back, and he's done his analysis on it. And he sits us down, and he's very serious, and he says, I'm sorry to tell you, he says, the two of you are not compatible. That's what he says. And I'm like, what? He says, and he's looking at me mostly, and he says, you have a lot of things that you need to work on, and you know, you have totally different qualities, you have totally different aspirations, and so he says, all this talk about getting married on June 1st, you need to cancel that. You need to cancel the wedding. I do not see the two of you getting married. That's my advice. And I'm like, we leave the session, and Veronica's devastated, but I'm like, hey, this guy doesn't know us, you know. He just met us. This is our second hour with him. And so I convinced her. She wanted to postpone things, I thought. And so I said, no, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to go back to the counseling sessions. And I've always wondered, is he right? Did he have a point? Because today we've been married 38 years. Praise God for that. I think he just had low expectations. I just think he had the wrong expectations. I say that to say, you're going to have people like that in your life. And I want to say, raise your expectations for what God can do in and through your life. You think maybe that your best life is behind you. God's expectation is your best days are still ahead. Maybe you think it's too late for you to do anything big with your career. God's expectations is that it's a brand new day and you can always do something new. You might think that this problem you've had will never go away. God's expectation is, I can set you free. He can. Maybe you felt, I've gone as far as I can in my career. God's expectation is, think bigger. I'm the God of the universe. Or you might think that you don't have the right education or the right experience. And I want to remind you today, God's expectation is, He will give you His divine supernatural power, and you will succeed. God, so set your expectations higher. At the Grove, I want to remind you that we have high expectations for you. Whatever gift or passion that God has given you in ministry, our expectation is that you use that giftedness here. We have high expectations for you to serve God here. When it comes to tithing and giving, our expectation is this is your church, then tithe and give here. And then expect that God is going to bless your finances. I want you to start seeing your finances different than you have. I want to challenge you. Our expectation is that you will invite your neighbors and your coworkers and your relatives to worship here on Sundays with you. Maybe you've never seen that as your responsibility. Our expectation is that you will. Maybe you have had a marginal commitment to Jesus Christ, period. And I want to say our expectation at the Grove is that you will be all in, that you will give your whole heart and soul to following Jesus Christ here with us. If that's the case, We have a baptism today in about 23 minutes. And I want to say, even if you didn't sign up, maybe you got up this morning and your plan wasn't to be baptized and you're all dressed in your Sunday best. That's fine. Come, we have a swimming pool on our campus, one of the few churches, so you come be baptized. We do have towels for you. And so come be baptized. I want to say, I'm serious. Right now, if this is your day to start putting the low expectations behind you, and you want to say publicly to the world, I am making an all-in commitment to Jesus Christ, then come be baptized today. Church, we have 31 people being baptized already. Can we make that 50 today? Can we make that 50? All right. Here's a second observation that I have of Caleb. I said Caleb had high expectations. The other thing I love about Caleb is Caleb chose to do the hard thing. Because not only does Caleb choose a mountain, but he chooses a mountain with giants on it. Let's go back to verse 12, and we read this. Caleb says to Joshua, you yourself heard that the Anakites, the giants, were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. So Caleb is asking for the hard thing. He's not just asking for a mountain. He's asking for a mountain with giants on it. Here's why taking on the hard thing is so important. It's not just to take on the hard thing to learn resolve. We take on the hard things that God gives us because they shape us and they grow us. Maybe you're going through something really hard right now and you think it's a curse. I want to say maybe it's a blessing because God is shaping you and growing you. The hard things that God has for you to do, they're there for a purpose. They will shape you and they will grow you. I've seen that happen for year after year over my years in ministry as a pastor. Going back when I was a college pastor, and I've shared this with some of you before, but it fits so well today, I want to share it again. And it's about the first time I invited college students to go to Cuba. I was a college pastor in Wheaton, Illinois, and I had a ministry of about 200 to 300 college students. And almost all of them had grown up in church. Most of them attended Wheaton College, and we were, it was late fall, and I was trying to plan a spring break missions trip. And so I was trying to think, where could I take Christian college students, where in this world, where they haven't been before? Because most of these students grew up in churches where they went on missions trip. The Wheaton College ran missions trips to Central America, South America, Africa, Asia every year. So I was wondering, where could I take college students that would really challenge them, that would be hard and new and bold and daring for them? And so I turned around in my office chair, and on my back wall, I had this map of the world. And I'm staring at this map of the world, and my eyes landed on Cuba. And I felt God say, take them to Cuba. And I was like, Cuba? I thought, man, can you even go to Cuba? You know, as far as I knew, it was communist, and nobody could go to Cuba. And so, but I felt God saying, take college students to Cuba. As hard as it is, you need to do that. And so I started making phone calls and calling friends in ministry saying, do you know anyone that's been to Cuba? And finally, I got connected with the president of a mission organization in Carroll Stream, Illinois, right down the street from Wheaton. And so I called this guy on the phone and I said, hey, I'm thinking about taking college students to Cuba this spring break. I hear that you've been to Cuba. I said, what do you think? What's your advice? And then there's this long pause, long, awkward pause. And finally, he answers and he says, that is a terrible idea. That's what he said. He said, Palmer, if you take college students to Cuba, it will be the worst mistake you ever make in ministry. I'm like, oh my goodness. So I said, well, why do you say that? He says, well, three things happened to us. He said, first of all, he said, I couldn't stand the food. The food was lousy. He said, we had rice and beans for breakfast. We had rice and beans for lunch. We had He said, I was so tired of rice and beans. He said, two, it was hot. It was like tropical hot. You know, it was Caribbean hot. And then the air conditioner went out in our hotel room. He said, we were sweating day and night. He said, it was terrible hot in Cuba. And he said, third, he said, I stepped on a rusty nail and I had to get a tetanus shot. And I said, is that it? Because, you know, I'm picturing waterboarding. I'm picturing, you know, whippings with an electrical cord and all kinds of things with a rubber hose. I just pictured, you know, jail time. And he said, no, that's it. I said, all right, thank you, goodbye. And literally, when I hung up, I said out loud in my office, thank you, God, we're going to Cuba. And as I started taking signups of students, I had 21 students sign up for that first trip. And when the chairman of our board found out we're going to Cuba, he invited me to lunch. And as a young college pastor, you never want that call. It's not a good lunch, all right? You're not going to enjoy lunch. So I go to lunch, and he says, hey, this taking college students to Cuba, he said, it's very dangerous. He says, I don't think it's a good idea. We could end up, somebody's going to die there. He said, why don't you do something closer to home? Why don't you just do something nice and easy and go downtown Chicago? And I said to him, listen, there are hundreds and hundreds of churches and thousands of Christians in the area who do ministry downtown Chicago. I said, but as far as I know, I don't know anybody that's going to Cuba. And so I said back to him, I said, so we have to go. And I didn't know if I was going to have a job after that lunch, but he let it go. And here's the kicker. We ended up going 3 times over the next couple of years to Cuba. And today, at least a dozen of those college students who went with me years ago are still in full-time ministry. Starting with Kyle Ray, our men's ministry pastor here, was one of those. And I just want to say that God gives you things to do that are hard, that maybe are a challenge, and maybe you don't want it right now. But I want to remind you that the hard things, they shape us, they grow us, they change us. We become different people. Let's go back to verse 12 in our text in chapter 14. Verse 10. Caleb says, so here I am, 85 years old, and I'm still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out into battle now as I was then. So give me this hill country. This guy's Keanu Reeves on Red Bull, isn't he? He's all fired up on something. And I want to remind you today, no matter what age you are, whether you felt you're too young or you're too old, that every day is a gift. Don't waste it. Everything that you do, even the hard things, even the things that you see are a problem, are a gift. Don't ask God for the comfortable things. Don't ask God for the easy things. Let him give you a challenge that will grow you. Caleb could have said, God, give me Shalom Acres. Just give me a nice retirement place at 85. He could have said, hey, God, give me a timeshare down by the Mediterranean. I'll be happy with that. He doesn't. He says, give me a mountain with giants and let me take it in your name. Why? Because the hard things, they grow us. The hard things that you do will shape you and change you. So don't avoid them. Take them on. There's a neurologist by the name of Marion Diamond at UC Berkeley. And she's maybe the world's leader, one of the world's leaders in neuroanatomy. And she studied our human brains, but she does a lot of her research with rats. There's a lot on rats today, isn't there? Anyway, so she had 2 groups of rats. And one group of rats, they just fed. Whenever they were hungry, they fed them several times a day. This second group of rats in the study, they put their food behind an obstacle course. So every time the rats wanted to eat, they had to navigate this new obstacle course every day. What did she find? The rats who had to navigate the obstacle course, their cortexes grew thicker, their neurons were larger, they lived longer, they became faster in the mazes than the rats that just ate the food. So her finding is, if you like a rat, then give it a problem. All right, that's what you need to do. And then she found the same is in humans, that our brains crave a challenge. So she writes this, it's not enough to continue activities in the same groove year after year. And by the way, she's talking to you and me, not just to rats. It's not enough to continue in the same groove year after year with the same expenditure of mental and physical energy. The brain requires new challenges if it's going to remain healthy. And so I want to say, choose the hard thing and resist the easy. I think we tend to, as human beings, to gravitate to things that are easy. The temptation is to find the easy way to do something. And I want to say, no. Ask God for a challenge. Don't say, God, make my life easier. Don't say, God, take away these problems. Say, God, give me a challenge. Give me something hard that will grow me. M. Scott Peck has written a famous book titled The Road Less Traveled. And really his title and the premise for the book comes from Robert Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken. In The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost, he writes this: two roads diverge in the woods, and I took the one less traveled, and it changed everything. In other words, I took the road that was harder and more difficult, and it changed everything. The first line in M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled, is this. It's a very short line. It's, life is difficult, period. Isn't it? Life gets hard, and sometimes we think those hard things are a curse. And like I said earlier, maybe those hard things are a blessing, because when you are pushed to navigate them and get through them, they grow us. Instead of avoiding those things, I say, take them on as a challenge from God. Maybe you should start seeing those problems as a blessing, because hard things have a way of growing our character. We learn to be more creative. We learn resolve when we face hard things. We learn to think differently. We learn new skills and to be resilient. What if you began to see every hard thing, every difficult challenge, as a way that you are to grow in your relationship with God? Here's what Jesus' brother James says. This is James 1, verses 2 and 3. Consider it a sheer a sheer gift, friends, when tests and challenges come at you from all sides. You know that under pressure, your faith life is forced out into the open and shows its true colors. So my invitation is to ask God for a challenge. Don't ask for the easy thing. Caleb says this in verse 12, with the Lord helping me, we will drive them out. And so my question this morning for you is, what hard things is God calling you to do? Maybe you've been avoiding these hard things. What hard things is he calling you to do? I have a list on the screen right now. Forgiveness is hard work. Is there someone in your life that you need to forgive? Doing justice is hard work. Be part of what we're doing here at the Grove. Loving difficult people is hard work. Inviting your neighbors to church is hard work. Serving Jesus Christ is hard work. I have a friend here, the Grove, named Jake. And Jake has owned his own business for years, and Jake's business is thriving. And I asked Jake if I could share this because I love Jake's story right now. Jake is convinced that God wants to use him more in our counseling space here at the Grove. He's already involved on Monday nights with Celebrate Recovery, but he feels like God wants him to use him to be a full-time counselor. This is late in his career. And so Jake has signed up to go to seminary to get a master's in family and marriage counseling. And I just want to say, that's hard work. He's in for the next 2 or 3 years. Taking master's classes will not be easy. But he's choosing the hard thing because he knows it will grow him and God will use him. And I want to say the same thing to you. Choose the hard thing. Resist the easy. I have one final challenge from the life of Caleb, and it's this. When we look at Caleb's life, we read this in the text, that Caleb followed God wholeheartedly. I think that's what set him apart. That's what made Caleb the man of God, the person of God that he was. Let's go back to verse 8, and we read this. I, however, this is Caleb speaking, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Caleb knew God would bless him and could only bless him if he followed him wholeheartedly. I would ask you today, if you thought about your own life, could you say with integrity, I am following God wholeheartedly? I've been saying this morning, resist. What's our resist here? Our resist is to resist following God half-heartedly. Let's be honest, there are some people who try to follow God half-heartedly. It never works out too well. They pray half-hearted prayers. There are some people that are half-hearted about reading the Bible. There are some people that are half-hearted about their commitment to the church and to be a part of a thriving church. There are some people that are half-hearted about giving and tithing. There are some people that are half-hearted about leading their family, their sons and their daughters to Jesus Christ. I want to change your way of living on that. The invitation today is to follow God wholeheartedly. I made a list here, and I've titled it The Profile of Half-Hearted Christians, all right? And hopefully this doesn't describe you, but I want you to sense what I'm talking about today. Half-hearted people go to church because that's what good people are supposed to do. Half-hearted people give money to church as long as it doesn't affect their standard of living. Half-hearted people rarely share their faith because they fear being stereotyped. Half-hearted people love stories of great faith, but they choose to live cautiously. Half-hearted people say they love Jesus, but only give him fractions of their time, money, and possessions. Half-hearted people enjoy nice things, so it's hard for them to give away more than they keep. Half-hearted people love the idea of God, but they don't love him with all their heart and with all their soul and with all their strength. My invitation, my challenge today is to become that wholehearted follower of Jesus Christ, because wholehearted people give away more than what is comfortable. Wholehearted people tell others around them every day of what Jesus Christ means to them. Wholehearted people do justice. They love mercy, and they walk humbly with God. If today is the day when you are ready to say, God, I'm going to make a wholehearted commitment to you, then I want to invite you to be baptized. Maybe you did it when it didn't mean much to you. Or maybe you've never been baptized. Then today is that day. It's a statement for you. It's a statement to Jesus Christ. It's a statement to the world that you are wholehearted after him. So church, could you stand? Could everybody stand? And I want to invite everyone who's being baptized today, would you come down front here? Because we want to pray over you before we go over here to be baptized. And I want to invite anyone else that wants to be baptized today. William, you're welcome to come on stage. Come on stage. All right, so let's applaud them. Everyone who's being baptized today. And if you want to join us, then come on up. We have our pastors and our staff here to pray with you. And we want to pray with you together. Josh, lead us in this. And we're going to sing this together before we go and be baptized. But right now, as we're singing, I want to invite you to come join us. Like I said, maybe you didn't plan on it, but come down anyway and be a part of this with us. Can we applaud everyone here today, God? This is amazing.